All right, now let's cross live to Zurich to discuss the situation in the Middle East with Anthony Weil, the founder and chief editor of the political website dailybell.com. So, as we were hearing moments ago, Colonel Gaddafi is now blaming Al-Qaeda's leader Osama bin Laden for igniting the revolt in Libya. Do you think there could be any truth to these claims?
Well, I suppose it depends on how much truth you believe in the fact in Osama bin Laden actually still being alive today. It's a convenient thing for Gaddafi to do. It seems to fit very well in with the general thrust of what I would call power elite plans and general propaganda over the past several decades. Terrorism in general is a great thing for the West to use as a means to foment constant chaos and thus a reason to be, so to speak, meddling in the affairs of the Middle Eastern societies.
So are you suggesting, though, that it's part of a propaganda plea that Colonel Gaddafi would say it's Al-Qaeda, it's Osama bin Laden who are behind all these revolts?
Well, I think Islamofascism in general is a theme that is being propagated throughout the Western media, and something that will continue to rise in elevation within the mainstream media in the Western societies as a means to continue to generate enthusiasm, let's just say, for a continued effort to try to squelch this enemy, however you wish to define it. And the current war in Iraq has, and in Afghanistan as well, has left an embattled, so to speak, Al-Qaeda that is a little less than, let's just say, attractive when it comes to being able to maintain mainstream attention. So, fomenting revolutions, color revolutions throughout the various Islamic states is quite possibly a means to create an ongoing enemy through which there would be the means and the need for Western, so to speak, powers to come in and execute force and solutions.
All right, when you talk about these Islamic states, there are concerns that the West maintains that radical fundamentalists will come to power in parts of the Arab world, the Arab world that is currently seeing protests and violence and unrest. How valid do you think are these fears?
Well, I think it's a very valid fear that theme will continue to be strummed quite aggressively, and perhaps it is the case. There's been a great amount of connection going back for several decades with Saudi Wahhabism, and several of the leaders and people who are involved today in these uprisings of supposed democratic revolution in these countries are offspring from that school of thought. And that has got deep connections into the Anglo-Saxon world and the hands that are behind the various international organizations that are, quite frankly, consistent in their ability to create chaos and then transfer power from their various nation states to themselves.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about creating chaos and doing a transfer of power. Some Western powers have been supplying weapons to the embattled regional leaders all the time, calling for peace, calling for democracy. What does it say to you about Western policies in the Middle East and North Africa?
It says that the playbook is stale and old. It's the same policies and the same playbook that was used, for example, and trotted in the 1930s and 40s throughout Europe. I mean, we had both sides of the battle being funded by similar industrial interests and monetary interests, and I don't think much has changed here today. The power structures that exist for mainstream control require chaos through which fermented solutions can be delivered by the powers that be. So I don't think it's a new play at all. I think it's just a continuation, and quite frankly, an embarrassingly boring continuation to watch in this internet age, because we're able to, quite frankly, dissect these memes, I think, with much greater accuracy and the ability for people throughout the world, the Mideast included, to be able to tune into various internet-based sites and be able to find out exactly what the heck has been going on. And it's, quite frankly, an old play. All
right, let's talk about the oil-rich Colonel Gaddafi. Been in power for, 30, 40 years now, reportedly worth $70 billion in banks around the world. If and when he's toppled, will the Western power, who's all the while crying for democracy, then be in charge of his big fat checkbook?
Well, here, it's quite common knowledge that his accounts have been frozen. He has no access to funds, and this is also, an age-old play as well. There are something along the lines of 50 or 60 different foreign dictators, or whatever you'd like to refer to them as, accounts here in Switzerland that have been frozen over the past several decades, and those funds, they just sit in the coffers of the banks and never get released back, because the new dictators or the new regimes that come in are, quite frankly, as corrupt as the old. And what we're seeing here today in the Middle East is probably not so much as an actual change in in a positive direction that would really bring any benefits to the people, but more of the same. I would suggest a reshuffling of the furniture in the same house. So the money, I think it's irrelevant, the amount of paper currency that's been established by these people in different accounts, and whether or not it's a fraction of what these people have or the entire fortune, who's to know or who's to say. The bottom line is, at the end of the day, is that the corruption will probably continue, and that right now for the lack of benefit for the people of the Middle East, who are engaged in a revolution that probably doesn't have a great deal of real substance underneath of it.
Now, when we talk about revolutions happening in the Middle East, in Northern Africa, do you think democracy can actually work in that region? If you look at Iraq, for example, invaded by the US in 2003, 8 years on, thousands in the streets protesting the government. Can a Western-style democracy work in that region?
Well, why would you ever want it to, first of all? Western-style democracy in its current state is far from what I would consider to be something that we should want in any of these countries. I think if there's going to be democracy, it should be democracy with a real change, and a change that reflects democracy that actually benefits the people. Today's democracy is nothing more than a mainstream control mechanism through which the vast majority of the public, who do not think, are emotionally engaged in situations that they don't even really realize what it is that they're voting for or approving. And if you think that democracy, which is supposedly what the U.S. is out there pushing and driving home for these people who need so much the philosophy of what they've developed and put together in the U.S., for example, take a look at what they're doing. I mean, building bases in over 100 different countries, basically putting at the end of a gun the word democracy and shoving it down their throats. To me, this is not democracy. This is abuse. This is nothing more than a system that is doomed to failure. And as long as central banks continue to stand side by side in a democratic system like we have, printing endless amounts of fiat money, which is devaluing by the minute, we're not going to have anything more here than chaos that is used to mask that devaluation process and hopefully distract people from the overall fraud that's been perpetrated on Western societies.
So would you say then that Western-style democracy, and when the West is calling for democracy, it's actually doing more harm than good? It's just riling up the people in the regions they're affecting?
Well, absolutely. I don't think if you ask the people who are in these regions, standing in these squares, chanting for democracy, if you ask them to define it, I'm quite certain you'd receive many different versions, and none of which would be the same. Democracy today is another dominant social theme that's been spun. People regurgitate it like they regurgitate global warming and other major themes without even thinking or understanding what it is that they're talking about. So, to me, yes, I think democracy. It sounds great, it feels great, but the base of what it is, and in its actual actions for what democracy or the leaders of democracy are doing today, it's shallow, hollow, and devoid of morality.
All right, now you talk about this Western-style democracy that essentially, as you were saying, is more of a propaganda tool. As we know, the banks and the defense industries stand shoulder to shoulder in Washington, D.C. But toppling leaders is often just the first stage of a revolution. Do you think examples of Tunis and Egypt could discourage other nations in the Arab world to revolt?
That I don't know. It's hard to say. Right now it's an emotionally driven revolution, if we're going to use that term. I don't necessarily think it's going to stop here. I think that it will continue. I think it's in the best interests of the elite who control the international organizations to see that we do have nation states in which there is chaos and more continued uncertainty, so that a global solution, which would naturally be provided by these wonderful international organizations, could be adopted. And that is all part of the stride, in my opinion, towards a one world order system of governance, as well as monetary and financial control that revolves around, and has for several years, several decades, past that back to the point of the Civil War in America as an example of intrusion and Anglo-Saxon, so to speak, dominance, creating the conflicts themselves for which they come through the other side and try to provide solutions. I don't know why we would suspect that this will stop. I think it will continue, or at least the effort will continue by Western powers to make this happen. The game changer potentially is the internet, where more and more people may realize that they're actually fighting on behalf of the very causes that they're trying to stamp out, the very forces of evil that they no longer wish to be subjected to. If they realize that, perhaps they won't have a revolution, or at least not one in the current color in which they're having it. Let's put it that way.
Anthony Wilder, founder and chief editor of political website, the dailybell.com. Thank you.